Thank you for your attention. As you know, the last couple days, what we're trying to do is introduce you to the Indagare community in all sorts of ways, and also practice what we preach in terms of collaborating with our customer. And to that end, for this panel, we thought it would be fun to introduce you to 4 of our amazing hosts on our insider journeys. And these guys are all experts in their fields. To me, they represent the luxury consumer's desire to really go deep when they travel and to use travel as continuing education. And we're seeing that more and more. People want to go back to places, or they want to go to new places with people who can take them really deep into understanding their passions as well as the destinations better. So all of these guys represent different ways that we're doing that. I'm going to just introduce you, starting with Page at the end from me. Page Knox is our art historian extraordinaire. She is a cult host for Indagare. We got really lucky. One of those silver linings of the pandemic, we started working with her on our global conversations when everybody was locked up at home. Paige has been an art historian, a professor at Columbia University for many years, as well as the Metropolitan Museum of Art's very favorite docent. And she started leading art clubs for us and teaching our members when they were locked at home about art in Western civilization. And then, of course, they all said, when we can travel again, can we please travel with Paige? And so we've been lucky to be able to do that, and she has done some amazing trips for us in Italy and Spain and France, and is going back to France and London hopefully this year for us. And then next to her is Ryan Hardy, a chef that many of you probably know and have had the pleasure of eating in his restaurants in New York City. He's the CEO of the Delicious Hospitality Group in New York, and Charlie Bird is one of his restaurants. Ryan is going to be taking a group of our members to Puglia later this month to really introduce them to all of the amazing artisans that he's been working with for many years. So you'll hear about that a little bit. Mitch Owens is a former editor at Architectural Digest, now American editor of World of Interiors. Mitch and I have been lucky to go on numerous trips together for some of our Architectural Digest trips to Marrakesh, and then last March we were in Maastricht in the Netherlands with a small group for TEFAF. I think you described it, Mitch, as the art fair where museums go to shop. A very special experience. And then Mary Morris, to my immediate right, is someone who honestly was a hero of mine for many years through her book. She's a wonderful writer. She's written, I think, one of my favorite books about solo traveling ever, called Nothing to Declare, and many other wonderful books since then. And she has been lucky to, we've been lucky to partner with her on some really special retreats where she brings her passion for literature and writing to our readers and our members, and she is going to be doing a special trip to Paris later this year for us. So thank you all for joining me today, and I'm going to get started with you, Ryan, because we talked a lot the last couple days about authenticity and sense of place. And the origin of food is something that is really important to you, sense of place and authenticity in food, not just in travel. So how does that affect you as someone who is both a chef and a traveler? How are you thinking about that with Puglia?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here today. What an incredible group to be a part of. You know, travel, I think, has become common for many people nowadays. People seem to be getting on airplanes on a frequent basis. For us, let me back up. When I started cooking, if you wanted to learn how to have the confit tomato at L'Arpège in Paris, you had to go sit in the restaurant and eat the confit tomato. And Alain Pessard was not going to give that recipe up. It wasn't going to be on YouTube. You had to get on an airplane and travel. Now, we have to go find ingredients in far enough places in the world to create food that has a story and has an interest to it. We, as chefs and as restaurateurs and just people in hospitality, which I think is everyone in this room, we have to create things for people, help curate things for people, open doors for people in ways that are unique, that are different, that are not something they can just read in a guidebook. Not that long ago, even 20 years ago, 15 years ago, if you wanted to really go deep on in Northern Ireland or something like that, you went and you bought a Fodder's Guide and you read all about these little towns. Now all that information is free on the internet. All of these things are out there, and for most of it, you can actually order these ingredients, in my case, and have them shipped to your home. But really finding authenticity means going off the beaten path. I am deathly allergic to tour guides and groups. In general, I see them and they're like the plague. I run the other way. I pretend I don't speak the language. And so I find myself trying to find the off the beaten path. And we all want to be locals no matter where we travel. And what does that mean? Does it mean you have to speak the language? Not necessarily. It means you need to be looking in the places that no one else is. It means you need to, get to know some people. Sit at a cafe too long, get to know the server, understand which place has the best coffee. It's the simplest stuff in life that I think is what leads us to authenticity. And I think it really comes through in whatever you do, whether you're writing a book or whether you're cooking a meal or whether you're planning somebody's trip.
I totally agree, and I often laugh with our Insider Journeys groups that I am the most anti-group trips person on the planet, because like you, it makes me totally allergic, but thankfully what we create is something very different, as Mitch and Paige have experienced, and Mary on the trips before. I'd be curious, you talked about the ways in which you can become a local. What have you planned for people in Puglia? Give us examples of what you can do on a trip that really makes the destination become much more authentic and understood.
That's a great question. Somebody asked on a recent call in preparation for our trip, they said, are we going to be doing some food demos, and will we be involved in them hands in, or will we just be watching them? And I said, neither. This is an experiential trip. This is about being in the room where the ingredients are being made. If you have never seen olive oil coming out of a press and the neon Martian green that it is, and then taste it coming out of that press, that is an experience. You can taste that olive oil back in your apartment in New York City or in wherever you live, even in the next town over. It will not be the same as what you tasted that day. Pulling the olives off the tree, understanding what type of olive that is. Why did those olive trees get planted in that particular region in 1600? What happened between now and then to save those olive trees? What's happening to them going forward? Is this a good year for olives? People don't think of those things, but this is nature we're talking about. It's not the same every year. And understanding those things, it's like a master class in wine or in any product. I think experiential travel is everything. We can look at art through the lens of many different things, books and computer screens, but going to see that in person or taste this stuff in person, that's travel to me. Yeah. And that's what it's like to be a local.
Yeah, you're totally right. Okay, so Mitch, speaking of art, you've talked a lot about the vocabulary of place, and again, going back to authenticity, but there is a vocabulary of place. And that's something I think as a design person you focus on when we've traveled together. Right. Will you talk a little bit about what that means to you and how that changes travel?
Yeah, I think what's incredibly interesting is I was once on a trip to a destination I will not reveal. And I remember walking out of the hotel into the lobby, into the garden, and my husband was there, and I said, "Are you enjoying yourself?" And he looked up, and we were not anywhere where he thought, and he looked up and he said, "We could be in Scottsdale." And I thought to myself, exactly. I mean, the point is the vocabulary of the place. It has to be authentic. It's the materials, it's the architectural details, it's the way a city is built, it's the way the roads go through a city, the way the alleys go. I love getting lost on alleys because you really get a feeling for, let's say, unimproved or parts of a city that aren't trying to attract a tourist. They're really authentic spots. And I think that you walk away with all of those visual references, that visual vocabulary, and I think the food vocabulary as well. You just go in, you allow yourself to sort of enter this really special book, and you learn the visual language, like I said, the visual language, the sounds, the smells. Vocabulary is three-dimensional, and it's also unseen. So trying to get, whoops, there we go.
Here we go, right? 2 minutes early.
2 minutes early.
That's what, according to that.
Exactly. Yes.
Kind of funny.
It is kind of, well, I'm glad that we had, I was glad we had the warning. Thank you for reminding me.
I saw it and I thought, oh, that's going to happen.
Right.
People are clearly amused by this.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they're almost off.
Leaving because of the emergency.
I don't know. Okay, you think
that
we're
work?
okay?
I think that may have worked.
Oh, we have a few more still going off. Okay, I think you can hear us through this.
This would be the momentary
beeping.
vocabulary of place, yes, the sound. But I think that sort of immersion is hugely, an enormously important part of travel, of taking your mind. You've left one place, you're going to another place. You need to become completely immersed in that environment, in those scents, in those tastes, in that architecture. Because if you're not experiencing it in that way, there's really no point. You have to leave behind all preconceived notions. I think another vocabulary, to go back to what you said about food, is, I always travel and I only want to eat the food that is made locally, that is the actual cuisine of the place. I don't want to step into an Italian restaurant if I'm in New Delhi. I just don't. I want to eat Indian food constantly because I feel like that's another way of becoming a local, is to have those tastes and those smells as part of your constant experience all day long.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Mitch, you mentioned India. You've done trips for us there too. You've traveled a fair amount with the luxury customer over the last couple of years, both before the pandemic and after the pandemic. How do you feel that over time what people are looking for in travel has changed?
I think based on how we started together and how we've ended up now, it's this increasing, I won't say increasing hunger for authenticity. They don't seem to want things smoothed out. They don't seem to want rough edges to be hidden. They want to really experience the place, the people, the culture, seeing everything from schools to local gardens to private art collections. They want it to be incredibly, incredibly authentic. And that means, really digging down deep when we're all building trips together, is asking our friends on the ground there, what else are we not looking at? What are we not seeing? And so having locals who are sort of casual partners of ours and who are really interested in introducing us to people who we haven't met before, who've just moved somewhere, who are in the middle of rebuilding a house, or in the middle of building a museum, or who've started a cooking class that we didn't know about before. Getting into, remember when we were in Beirut and we went to Nabil's house, the artist Nabil Nassar's house, which we were totally not expecting. It just happened. He found out we were in town. It wasn't 6 degrees of separation, it was like 1.5 degrees of separation. He learned about it and he said, come to our house, all of you. We're going to have lunch like in 2 days. And it was the most heavenly meal we'd had, and what made it even more interesting was the fact that we had a certain number of guests, and he and May Dauk did the same thing. If you're going to have 20 of your guests, I'm going to invite 20 of my friends. So they can understand and meet Beirut. not anybody else who's not Beiruti. They had to be Lebanese. And it was fascinating. It was also fascinating because the world is so small there, we kept meeting them at every other party. But it was great. It was that real desire for a deep dive so that you woke up the next morning, our guests woke up the next morning talking about who they had met the night before. An architect, a sociologist, a doctor, a fashion designer, none of whom they'd ever heard of, but who opened a different door for them than they were expecting.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. And certainly when you talk about going to a place that is not completely cleaned up around the edges, those trips were absolutely extraordinary. And Paige, you have done the same thing. You've spent years because you've led Metropolitan Museum of Art group trips as well as ours.
Yes, I'm the group you're running from. I'm that and I loathe the groups too.
But so how have they changed, and how has what people are looking for changed?
Well, it's changed very dramatically, and I actually think Melissa is the model by which all people she creates these very exclusive experiences that allow you to go to the wonderful museums of the world, but you go at 9 a.m. before they open. So you are alone with the fabulous Velázquez, Las Meninas in the Prado, or you're by yourself with the Mona Lisa. It is something that travelers absolutely not just want, they require. You must have access. Access is very critical. Whether it's a very well-known museum, you go in before hours or after hours, or a private collection that people haven't seen. But what I find has been so marvelous about my connection with Indagare is that I'm able to educate people before they go. So for me, it's all about what we call aura. There was a very important essay written in the 1920s by a man named Walter Benjamin, and it was called The Art of Mechanical Reproduction. And this is 100 years ago, but he talked about how people were losing their connection with authenticity through reproduction. And heavens, would he ever have known now that you can pop on the internet and get a virtual tour of every museum in the world. But to me, there is nothing like being educated, really understanding what an artist was attempting to do, learning a lot, doing a deep dive into a particular painting or a piece of sculpture or an architectural space, and then experiencing that space and experiencing it in a way that is not touristy, in a way that feels authentic. And Melissa's done an incredible job. I mean, when we were in Spain, we went to the Alhambra, but we went at night. And it was magical. And I wanted to bring everybody back during the day to realize how awful it was during the day with thousands of people. But these kinds of experiences, if people are educated and they know what to expect, there's a great level of anticipation. And I think anticipation is an important part of travel. People get excited about what they're going to see. And for me, there's nothing better that people are talking about Leonardo at breakfast. That's what I want to hear people talking about.
And I'm actually curious, Paige, why do you think it is that we've seen such a rise, you and I've talked about this, the rise of group trips or art-centric trips. What is it that has changed that makes people now willing to join these groups that we all don't like for a certain type of education?
Well, I would argue that the joy of art, bringing people together, has been around for centuries. I've also found in recent years that art tends to be something that, depending upon what period you're talking about, can appeal to people regardless of religion or politics or social standing. And it's something that really brings people together and that people can collectively discuss, and it can be very powerful and very meaningful. So I found during the pandemic, when we were locked down and we were doing a lot of these classes, people started to really have an intense desire to have that authentic connection. They learned a lot, but they realized the importance of being in front of the actual work or being in the space. And I think that the pandemic fueled this desire for people now to have, and yes, people go on these groups and we do go through museums and places that are well known, but then we try to go to private homes and to allow for kind of both types of experiences. But I think art has a very powerful way to bring people together.
Yeah. Thank you. Now, Mary, you are an author, an amazing author, and you've written in different books about different places. One of my favorites was also about India and your quest to see the tiger.
Yeah, the tiger.
But I'm curious about storytelling and destinations and how you feel that storytelling impacts destinations and what people can do.
Right. I think we're all talking about storytelling, right? Ryan, you mentioned in terms of food, in terms of buildings, in terms of history. For me, I mean, I'm all about story, right? There was a moment in graduate school when I was going to write my dissertation on the relationship between landscape and literature. And then I realized that I was going to drop out of graduate school and I was actually just going to travel and read books while I traveled. And that the relationship between landscape, I mean, for example, I was very obsessed with the fact that I don't think Tolstoy could have written from a Caribbean island. Like, I think there's something about the expansiveness of Tolstoy. I think there's something about Jane Austen that works for England. So I got really quite obsessed about this. I still am, if you want to talk to me later. But anyway, I just began to be really interested in that interface between places and the stories they generate. So it's really hard for me to like be in Paris and not think of Victor Hugo. It's hard to be in London and not think of Dickens, but also some of the more contemporary writers like Zadie Smith and people, in more the writers now. So I'm always interested in how stories fuel our imagination, and then how stories come from those journeys. Like, it's a kind of connection that's sort of hard to explain a little bit. But, I remember when I was just out of college, and this is probably one of the reasons I dropped out of graduate school, I did finish college, was I read The Colossi of Maruzzi by Henry Miller about his first journey to Greece, and it was about being a young writer and discovering Greece for the first time before it turned into Greece, if you know what I mean. And it just was so beautiful and I had to go to Greece. Like, that narrative informed my personal narrative. So I'm always moving back and forth between the inner and the outer. Like, armchair travel reading doesn't work for me because I simply want to go and read while I am there. Which also, can I just add one little thing which I would love to see in places that I visit or hotels or whatever, is a reading room, a quiet space. Even in our room, the rooms, books that connect to the place where you are. I think just that so enriches, it adds a layer of deepening that we may not get as we're just walking around. I'm sorry to keep using the sewer metaphor, but there is something about knowing what is underneath a place or a space. Like, when I traveled on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, I brought my tattered copy of Anna Karenina with me, because though I'd read it a number of times, there was nothing like reading it while I was crossing Siberia on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. That was a completely transformative, even though Anna never took that train, but it was a transformative reading experience. So I'm interested in that interface.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
What else do you want in a hotel?
What else do I want? What?
In a hotel.
Communal tables for solo travelers, places to eat so you're not alone. May I just say that? I traveled extensively solo, and I'm hoping I will again soon. And one thing I have found, I hate eating alone. And I love a situation where in India, actually, there are often communal tables in restaurants and places you stay. And I think that, I guess the question is, are you a solo traveler by choice or by necessity? So if you just want to be left alone, okay, good, leave me alone. But if you don't want to be alone and you want to meet some people, and you might want to even hang out and travel with somebody, have a communal dining table that just anyone can go to. I was just on a cruise, and they had, granted no one ever went to this because I checked it out every evening, but they did have solo travelers happy hour. And I don't know if no one was happy or no one was solo, but it was a nice idea.
And actually, that brings me to your solo travel, because you,
Yes.
as I mentioned, wrote that wonderful book about solo travel, but you've thought a lot about the value of people traveling on their own.
Yes.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts on why that's such an important thing for people to consider doing and how to be good at it.
Well, Albert Camus said somewhere that the only real travel is solo travel because it's the only, I may have actually just made that up, but I think he said it somewhere. But anyway, don't look it up. Someone said it. But the idea that, it's one thing if you have a companion. It's another thing, I think he did say that. It's another thing if it's just you, your raw self in the world, moving through the world. And I do think it's a different experience. And for example, I'm going to Paris next week. My husband's going with me, but he's going several days later because I want to just walk around and I want to shop and I want to just shop for food, put things in the fridge. I just want to be in Paris like that. And it's a very different experience than if you have someone else. I think it's good to have someone who has the same rhythms as you do, but there's something about that experience of, okay. Do I have time for a very, very short anecdote? I was on a layover in France, and I met a guy, and I started talking to him over coffee, and it turned out that I shouldn't say this. He came from a place where, never mind, I'm not going to tell you. Yeah, he knew how to cook. He came from a place where cannibalism had been practiced, and he knew a lot about cannibalism. And we wound up at 6:30 in the morning talking about cannibalism at Orly Airport, and I thought to myself, I would not be having this conversation if I were with another person. I just wouldn't be having it. I'm done.
I was going to say, thank you, Ryan. It goes right back to food. Okay, so Ryan. Always goes back to food. Okay. We need
to piggyback on Mary's story. I remember when I was a teenager and I went to Paris for the very first time, and of course I had my checklist of things to see and do and go, and only to have a very elderly Russian friend who had grown up in Paris tell me, throw your list away. And I said, why? And she said, I'll tell you how to do Paris. And I was only there a week, and she said, every morning you wake up in your hotel, you open the map, you close your eyes, you plunk your finger down. That's where you're going today. And she said the goal was to get there, and then the goal was you couldn't take your map. The goal was you had to get there, and then spend the rest of the day making your way back to your hotel. She said, as long as you remembered what side of the Seine you were on, it was fine. And her theory behind it was that, she said, you'll never see the Louvre, you'll never see this, that, and the other thing, but you will go down streets that nobody goes down except for locals. And you will have to stop at some point and eat in a cafe that only locals frequent. And to get back to food, for 1 second, moving on from there, I managed to almost get back to my hotel, and there was a fruit stand, and it was the first time I had ever eaten a white peach. And it was warm, and it was July, and I still remember how that tasted, and I think it's the best thing I've ever had in my life.
I'm leaving. I'm not sure I can follow that.
No, you can. But keeping in line with food, I do want to ask you, Ryan, about Puglia, because that's where we're doing our first trip with you, and it's a place that really is important to you as a chef. And can you talk a little bit about what that region means to you and why?
Yes. If you haven't been to Puglia, Mary and I were chatting briefly before, and I said, no one ends up in Puglia, right? You have to want to go there. It's a destination place. It's become very hot in the last, 24 months, 36 months. I don't know. It's like suddenly out of nowhere, everybody wants to go to Puglia. But it's a place of discovery, and for me, you need to know a lot about history to understand Puglia. To understand, look, I'm a chef, which means I have a lot fewer graduate degrees than everybody else on this table here. But I think of myself as an anthropologist, and first and foremost, I think of myself as telling the story of a people through food. And whether we're talking about New York food, or whether we're talking about Italian food, or Indian food, or someplace, whether you're eating a meal, you're thinking about the ingredients that are in that food. The first thing you think of is this delicious? And what's the texture, and what's the temperature, and how all the things that we do as humans. And then you're thinking about, wow, where am I right now? Am I on that train reading Anna Karenina? What is it that's taking you? It's transformative in that moment. For me, I've had more of those moments in Puglia, drinking too much wine at lunch, eating seafood that I've never even seen before. I don't understand what it is, but it's delicious, and then taking my clothes off and jumping off the rocks. That is transformative, and I think those moments are what we all crave. We get up, we go to work, we write books, we read books, we do all these things, but those things are what I search out in Puglia. Puglia is a place that was never developed. The Greeks settled it. There were native tribes there that built stuff along the coast, various types of structures, Trulli and lots of other things. The Romans barely touched there. It really hadn't been seen since the Middle Ages and the Crusades. It just wasn't worth it to so much of the Roman Empire. They went in different directions. And when you really look back at the history, I also travel with a history of Italy book with me, and it's called The Foods of Italy. It's one of my favorite books and treasures, and I've read it multiple times, and it's tethered as well because I want to read each one of those towns and what the dishes are in those towns and why they're there. How did this end up that way? Why did orecchiette become the flavor of Puglia, and why is it made on the streets by old people still today? That's what Puglia is to me. It doesn't look like Italy. People ask me, why do you go to Puglia? If they don't know, now you can read it in a lot of magazines. But if you don't know, Puglia is all of the things that I love about Mexico, crossed with all the things that I love about Italy, crossed with this incredibly turquoise blue water, and all of the ingredients that you need to still discover. And if you can put all that together into one town, that's what it is. And it's pretty extraordinary.
You sold me. And actually, it makes me want to ask, okay, Paige, what is a transformative art experience for you? In the same way that, Mitch can talk about his peach, right, or Ryan talks about Puglia so lyrically, what destinations around art really inspire you every time and deliver in a deep and profound way?
Well, that's a hard question to answer because there are many, but I would say Rome. For all the reasons that you talked about. It's a lasagna, to use a food metaphor. You have all of the various moments, incredible moments in history, just on top of each other. And you can just go from the Pantheon to the Vatican, and you can experience, fantastic rivalries like Borromini and Bernini, and they're right next to each other, and you can walk into these buildings, and you can feel the history literally in front of you. And the paintings, the sculpture, it's all, an exceptional experience, but I think being in the same streets that Caravaggio walked in, or going and being in the area where Michelangelo lived, to me that is truly transformative, and I walk around in that same way. Whose steps am I following in?
What about you, Mary? In terms of, yes, transformative experience.
Transformative experiences. I don't know. It almost every experience. I mean, I was just on a cruise and I can't believe literally how excited I was when they pull up the anchor and sail. I was like a child. I was like the anchor. I was like a kid. There's so many transformative experiences for me, and each one seems to be at a different moment in my life. Like I've done these 4 solo travel narratives, and each one is a different moment. This is again a funny one, it's a kind of weird one, but okay. Like Paris, okay, I had a broken leg, you don't need to know anything more about it, but I was in a wheelchair. Okay, and we went to the Louvre, and I couldn't see any paintings because there were so many people, and it's really hard if you're in a wheelchair actually to see anything in the Louvre. So I said to the guide, I can't see anything, where do I go? And she looks down at me and she goes, go to Grecian sculpture, no one's ever there. And I thought, okay, great. So it was really hard to get to, and we had to go way, way up, and then there was some sliding that we had to do that was complicated. We got up there, and it was beautiful and quiet and serene. And the fire alarm went off in the Louvre, okay? And they said you have to evacuate in 8 languages. Well, I couldn't because I was in a wheelchair, and I was way, way up in a very isolated place. And again, I said to the guard, and everyone's leaving. I mean, literally everyone, I was alone in the Louvre. I don't know what else to tell you. We're alone in the Louvre.
There are worse places to be left alone.
And it was, talk about access. I mean, I'm telling you, it was amazing. And that was really transformative. I mean, there was literally no one, the guards left, there was no one there. And we just wandered around, and we tried to get to the Mona Lisa, actually, but there was a door that we couldn't go past. But it was, I always remember that as being one of the funniest, in a way, transformative, silent. People talked about during the pandemic, actually, when they went to, like, Venice, and there were no tourists there. It was sort of that kind of, I guess what I'm talking about, like, getting away from everyone, and yet in a place that is beautiful and where you kind of want to be, and, like, you know, to be alone with a great painting at, you know, at 8 in the morning or something like that. I mean, those moments. But I don't know, everything for me, getting here is transformative. Walking into this space was transformative. I don't know. Hogwarts, absolutely. I don't know, right?
May I add something?
Yes,
Yes,
please, because I'm rambling in silly ways.
There are so many, again, being trapped in the Louvre is not the worst place to be. But I remember going to Buenos Aires, my first time, and I was very disturbed about how late the evenings were there, and especially when my hostess called dinner at 11 p.m., and then dinner was over at 1, and then at 1:30, she wanted to take us all to a tango hall, a milonga, and I thought, oh, this is going to be so tacky. I thought, tango, okay, whatever. And I remember being completely blown away because it was a local tango hall, not like a touristy tango hall or whatever. And it was the first time I'd ever seen, you think tango and you think very flamboyant moves and tango argentino and all that sort of Broadway thing. And it was a tango hall full of older married couples who were dancing in sort of counterclockwise on this big floor, like this floor. And they danced in the way that only people who have slept in the same bed for 30 years can dance. And it was astonishingly beautiful. I'd never seen anything like it because you couldn't put a piece of paper between them. And yet they were doing everything you knew about tango moves, but very slowly. And it was so incredibly sexy. And I just sat on the sidelines and just thought, this is astonishing. So things like that is a hugely authentic experience, to think you're going to see one thing and you see something totally different.
And also spontaneous, right? I mean, I'm not talking about the spontaneity of that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so I want to know where all of you would like to go next.
Oh, why me?
Because you're here. Because I want to know where you're going.
Where do I want to go? I don't, I really want to go everywhere. I mean, I don't think I can. Okay, I want to go back to Kenya. I want to go back to Africa. Yeah, I want to go back. In part, I do want to say one thing, and you guys have been involved in this. I've kind of stumbled on a community that's very involved in the Maasai world, and I think I've gotten very interested in impactful journeys, where you actually can make a difference culturally, and really have that sort of experience like that. And there is this place called Nashulai that I highly recommend in Kenya, and it's very beautiful and totally Maasai run. And anyway, that's where I'd like to go next. I've been there, but I want to stay there. I haven't stayed there. So.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Me?
Yeah, Mitch.
Oh, me? Oh, God. Okay, I was going to try and be the last. Where do I want to be? Where do I want to go next? It's funny. I'd like to travel more in the Middle East. I'm right now reading the Confessions of St. Augustine, which I've never read, and which, if any of you are interested, it's really hard going. But I want to travel that part of the world because he's from that part of the world, and it's always been a part of the world I've wanted to live in, a place I've traveled through a lot, but I haven't traveled enough. And I just sort of want to get lost in the Middle East, sort of in the footsteps of, many, many people before me. Lady travelers, archaeologists, St. Augustine.
Well, actually, before you give that away, Mitch, another question I quickly had for you. In terms of design destinations, what are some of the places? Jonathan Adler was here yesterday, and he has an interest in Vienna at the moment from a design perspective. What are some of the places that you think are particularly interesting for people who are interested in design?
The first thing that pops into mind is Helsinki. Helsinki is like walking into a fairy tale. They have their own special version of Art Nouveau. And if you've ever seen an oriel window, which you have here at this complex, that sticks out like a bay, if you've never seen one being held up by a massive mosaic frog, you have not seen Art Nouveau. The Finnish do it in the most bizarre way possible. And it's wonderful. It really is like through the looking glass. It's the craziest, most beautiful place I've ever seen in terms of architecture that you think you're familiar with, and it takes you somewhere down a completely different path. Their version of neoclassicism bears absolutely no resemblance to Stockholm's, bears absolutely no resemblance to any other place in the world. It's very much grounded in Finnish culture, Finnish materials, Finnish philosophies. And that's just, that I would love to go back to again. I love that place.
Fascinating.
I'm sold. I want to go to Helsinki now, too.
Reindeer.
Yeah, you can eat reindeer and
Reindeer,
lots of
I've had
strange
whale,
sea
yeah,
creatures.
There's lots of fun things. If you haven't been to Scandinavia, there's a lot up there. There's a lot of amazing things. I haven't explored South America at all, and it is such a vast world down there. In the same way that the continent of Africa, I think, is must be seen. My wife, Agatha, who is joining me on the other side there, lived in Africa during college, and I thought that was just one of the most amazing things that influenced her. And I think seeing another continent like that is really important and impressive, especially from a food standpoint. There's just so many amazing food cultures there, and so many native ingredients that came from there that shaped everything that I think of as food, including basically everything Italian, came from South America at one point. So for me, traveling to the roots of it all would be really important.
Yeah, no, I remember going to Peru the first time and learning that basically between Escoffier and the Chinese and the Peruvians, those were the original cuisines. Amazing.
Okay, everything's been covered, so I'm going to get very particular. Uruguay is on my list. I have a very old friend who has some fabulous hotels in Uruguay, and I think Uruguay I think it's very hot right now, but also there's such a new interest and fascination in South American art. Also, I want to go to the Philippines. A similar trend in scholarship is thinking about the world globally and the role the Philippines played as an important destination between Spain, the America. It's really quite fascinating, the cultures that are there. And I'm really dying, in terms of specific hotels, to go to the Chateau de la Coste. That's where that's on my, because talking about art and hotels, and what do you want out of an amazing hotel, to have a true, and I know you did a podcast on that property, and I think that is, in some interesting ways, kind of the wave of the future for new hotels to start bringing artists and having artistic collaborations. So I'd love to sort of see how the Louise Bourgeois in the pool works.
Yeah, in fact, I'd love to hear what you think hotels in general can do with art, because Patty McKillen, who did create that, and it's a fantastic passion project of his relationships, which is one of the reasons I think it's such a special property, is it really is, it's not just the artist, but it's his relationships with the artists that comes through. But I'd be curious for people with maybe not quite as grand a vision as he has, how do hotels do a good job and a bad job incorporating art?
Well, it's tricky, and it's basically up to the taste of the owner of the hotel. I just was recently in Pasalacqua, and I thought that was such a phenomenal engagement with decorative arts of the 17th, 18th century. You feel immersed, and that the person who owns the property is willing to allow people to live amongst those things, which are quite rare and precious. I think hotels can work with museums and with artists in a lot of interesting ways. I think you can have great relationships with museums and, again, offer access. I think oftentimes a great concierge. I was in Amsterdam during the Vermeer exhibition, and everyone had Vermeer fever, and it was very interesting to see how different hotels engaged with the exhibition. In terms of art in the actual property, I think you're going to see again, it's not a hotel, but go to Tiffany's and see how they, now that they're owned by Louis Vuitton, see how they've incorporated contemporary works of art into their build. It's exceptional. And I think that's going to be where you're going to see really high-end hotels being willing to invest in contemporary artists. And I think contemporary artists now are exploring things that they had never done before. One of the big issues of a lot of artists working today is their prices are high, they get bought by private collectors, those pieces go into homes and no one sees them. In fact, there are programs now if a collector wants to buy a particular work, say by Carrie James Marshall, you have to buy two. One goes to your collection and one goes to a museum. And I think you're going to start seeing those kinds of things happening in hotels as well. It's a really interesting new change, but I think that, the hotel, that Chateau Lacoste is a transformative, it's a real trailblazer in that way.
Happy to try and help you figure out how to get there.
I did want to pick up on one thing that Mitchell said, which is a quote I love from St. Augustine, which is, the world is a book, and if you don't travel, you haven't opened it. And I think that whole idea of like that we have to, open up the world in that way. In terms of your question, my thing, I'm not actually afraid to ask anybody a question, like random strangers. And I was recently in Belfast, and the hotel had all these like authentic pubs you could go to, and I knew they weren't going to be authentic. So I just asked a random person. I said, if we want, where do we go? And they said, go to Kelly's Cellar. And we went to Kelly's Cellar, and guess what? It was like a real place, and it was real locals. And I just, I have a friend, I use this now, I stole it from him. He gets in a cab, and he says to the driver, take me where you like to eat. Take me to your restaurant. And he said he has incredible experiences. I think one thing that hotels could do is have, I would call them staff picks, or like local suggestions that are not like the fine dining necessarily, but like in a bookstore, this may not be a book that you would pick up, but there's a staff pick, and then to find those local places, those and have those spontaneous. I have basically found that any recommendation I get is going to be a disaster, so I'm better if I follow. I shouldn't say that. I don't mean that about to anyone. I just mean that I follow my nose better. And that, if someone gives me a great tip, like I love great tips. Okay. Hope I didn't insult anyone.
I follow the Indagare website. Yes. Best restaurant suggestions in the world. Indagare website is my guide.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you. Well, I've lost my voice, as you guys can tell, so I think we're going to end on this. But thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today and for being amazing parts of the Indagare family. Ryan, you're about to head out with a whole bunch of our team, but others of you have already hosted them. Thank you so much. We love having you as part of the family and love your insights and your inspiration. Thanks.